Welcome back, guys. In today's video we're going to look at the Basic Revit wall. So let's start a new project. New, and as always I go to none and metric. So the first thing I'm going to do is place a floor. So I go to the architecture tab, floor architectural, and I'm just going to use the basic floor. Now let's call that 10 meters by 10 meters, and we'll finish that floor. The next thing we're going to do is place our wall. So under the architecture tab, wall architectural, let's place our basic wall. So one thing before we move on, we're going to change the scale so that we have more clarity for the next step. So let's change the scale to 1 to 20, and let's change the detail level to fine. So the next thing we're going to do is play around with the layers of this wall. So we select the wall, and then in the properties panel we go to edit type. Next you can go into the structure and select edit. Now this is where you can build the structure of your wall based on layers. So I'm going to use a standard cavity wall in the UK, so we colloquially call it a brick and block wall. So I'm going to insert 2 more layers. So I would have brick, a air cavity, and then block. So let's do the thicknesses first. So the brick layer would be to the exterior side, so you can see the exterior side is at the top and the interior side is at the bottom. So the exterior side, let's do our facing brick, which will be 102.5. Again, this is going to be UK sizing. And then we have our cavity layer in between, so we call that 50 millimeters. And then we have our blockwork inside, so that will be 100 millimeters. For the next column, let's resolve our materials. So for the first one, let's go for brick, and we're going to create a new material. Right click, rename, let's call that brick. Then we go to the appearance tab, asset browser, and we have a nice medium blend here, so let's double click that, go into our graphics, and then select to use render appearance. Next thing we want to do is add some patterns to this. So the surface pattern will be the brick pattern. We have multiple brick patterns in use in the UK and worldwide, such as English bond, Flemish bond, stretcher bond. Because this is a single leaf, we're going to use the stretcher bond. So there are 2 types of patterns. There's drafting patterns and there's model patterns. Drafting patterns are scaled patterns which always remain the same dimension, and usually on the sheet they would remain the same scale and distancing apart. Model patterns are scalable, so basically they reflect the real life properties of the hatch. So if you want something to be 100 by 100 millimeters, it would always remain at 100 by 100 millimeters. So let's go into model patterns because we want our bricks to be more realistic. And then we have to load the pattern in. So to load the pattern in, you go to new fill pattern, and then you have to select custom, and then this is where you have to browse for your .pat file. There are multiple PAT files on the internet. I'm going to use the one that comes with Autodesk based on when you install Revit and you select the library. So I'm going to hit browse. So once I'm in there, I need to go to my computer, my C drive, and then I go to program files, Autodesk, Revit, and then data. So in this file you have metric patterns and you have standard patterns. I do believe it's in the metric pattern, so I'm going to select that file and click open. And then you scroll down and then you can see a selection of patterns which you can use. So I'm going to select the standard UK brick, which is 225 by 75. This is a coordinating brick size, so this includes the mortar joint. And then I select OK. And then we can select the color that we want that hatch to be. So I'm just going to turn this to black and OK. For the background, I'm not going to add a background, but if you wanted to, you could have a background color which typically would be solid, and then you can overlay that with the foreground hatch. So for instance, you could have a solid background color of white, and then the pattern could be red, for example. For this purpose, we're not going to use the background colors. So the next thing we want to do is add a cut pattern. So this is the standard hatch pattern of the brick when it's cut in plan or section. So let's go into that. We only have the drafting view for this one. So this is a standard cut pattern that we would use, and it's only indicative of the material, whereas the surface pattern is a 1-to-1 scaled variant of that, so it's always going to be 75 by 225 millimeters. The model radial button is not applicable to a cut pattern. So let's go again into our pattern file. We're going to create a new one. We go into custom, we go into browse, then I think this one is in the revit.pat file, and then we can open that one. One thing to note is the UK has slightly different standards to the US. So our brick pattern as standard is actually the same as the steel pattern. So I'm going to use the steel pattern as this is a US based hatch file. And then I'm just going to rename that to brick cut, and then select OK. And now I have brick cut on my list of patterns, and then I can OK. Then again, I can change the color of that pattern, and I'm going to select black again and OK. And then once that's done, that's the brick material resolved. OK. The next one down is the air cavity, so let's go into that and fill that in as well. And I'm also going to do the same for the block work. And so the next column we have the function. So this is important to change this because we can play around with the graphical style. And then also it affects the join conditions, which we'll come on to later on in the video. So for brick, I'm going to change this to finish 2. For air cavity, I'm going to change this to thermal air layer. And for the block work, I'm going to actually leave that one as structure 1. The next thing is to align these based on where they sit in the wall. So the brick is always outside of the core. So I'm going to move this up outside of this core boundary. So line 2 is a core boundary and line 5 is a core boundary at the minute. And then let's hit OK. So this wall is in place, and at the minute it's currently uninsulated. We can do 2 methods to add insulation. We can add it as a separate wall which lines the inside face, or we can integrate it into this wall. Let's play around with both methods. So I'm going to copy this wall. So I'm going to select it, copy, and then copy that down. Let's call it 2 meters. For the first wall, I'm going to integrate the lining, and for the second wall, I'm going to have the lining as a separate wall. So I go to edit type and duplicate. And then I go to edit that, and then I can insert 2 more layers. Insert, insert. So again, if you wanted to copy one of the materials from earlier, you can Control C and Control V, so that you don't have to go into the material edit zone. So again, I'm going to call this 50 millimeters, and then my gypsum wall plasterboard would be 15 millimeters in this case. And let's change the material to plaster. So this one has the lining integrated. So let's draw a separate wall for the lining on wall 2. Then we can draw that wall in place and use the align tool under modify, align, tab and select the outside face, and tab and select the inside face. So that's 2 independent walls in this scenario. So the reason you might want to separate your walls is, number 1, so they can be tagged independently. This wall lining can be used against multiple walls, so not necessarily just against the brick and block wall. It can be used against, for instance, a solid wall, and it can be continuous. So let's draw that scenario in place. So now that wall's been modeled, let's split this wall and add that solid wall in place. So we go to split, we select the wall in 2 different locations, and then we can select it and change this wall to our solid block wall. What we can also do is align this wall. Because the wall is joined at the center line, we're going to unjoin it. Then we can align it edge to edge or face to face. And then we can realign the ends by using the align tool. So in this scenario, the interior wall lining reads as one wall which runs all the way through, even though we have multiple walls to the exterior. This is one of the reasons why you would want to separate this wall rather than integrating it into the wall, because then you would save on your wall types. So the next thing we're going to do is add a column into the wall and see how that reacts. So I'm going to go to structure, I'm going to go to column, and then I'm going to load a column in. So let's go to concrete rectangular and open that up. So I'm going to add a column in, and then I'm also going to cheat this a little bit. I'm going to change the material to blockwork, just so that when it attaches to our wall, it blends in graphically. So changing the material to blockwork, then hit OK. And then the next thing I'm going to do is align it with the face of the blockwork. So I'm selecting that face, and then I'm selecting the blockwork, and then I'll do the same for the other one. Select the face and select the blockwork, and then the next thing to do is to join them together. So let's click on modify, join, and then you can select the column, and then you can select the wall, and then same again, you can select the column, and then you can select the wall. So you can see here that it has split the lining where the column is, and this is a good scenario. On the other side, it hasn't split the lining, so you'd have to manually split the lining using the split command, making sure you select the lining and pressing the split button, and then you'd have to drag each end back just so that they do not clash. Finally, you would use the align tool, and you would align the lining to each side of the column, like so. So let's do one more test with this. We want to go to the architecture tab, and we want to add a door in place. Let's load that in. So we go up again to our library, go to doors. Let's choose a external door, and we'll just choose the external double one and open that up. So let's place that in place here. Let's place it again in place there. One difference is that the door also cuts the lining for the lining which is integrated, and it doesn't automatically cut the lining when it's not integrated. What you have to do in that case is join the lining wall with the main wall. So we go to modify, we go to join, and then we can select the lining and then the main wall. So that joins together, and that automatically cuts that lining wherever there's an opening. So it replicates the same condition that we have there. So let's run our lining around the columns and see where we get from there. So I'm going to select a lining, and then I'm going to select the create similar button, and then I'm going to draw my lining around the column. If you start to draw and the wall is the wrong way around, to flip it you can press the spacebar. So I'm going to do that now, and the wall flips, and then you can continue drawing that wall around. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select that wall, I'm going to select create similar, and then I'm going to draw it in place. And then I'm going to align both of these using the align tool. So align, select the face, and tab and select the other face. The next thing you want to do is make sure that these walls are continuous. So you want to extend them so they join with the other lining. So you can pull this little node at the end and extend it. Then the same on the other side. You can pull this node at the end and join it. And that works quite nicely. Let's do the same on the other side. So select the wall, drag the little node. So again, that actually works quite nicely. Let's move on to the next scenario. The next scenario is having a rainwater pipe or rainwater leader in place, and you want to attach that to the side of the column, and then you have a void space next to the column. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to go to annotate, I'm going to go to region and drop it down and use a masking region, and then I'm going to draw a circle which is going to be 55 millimeters in radius, and then I'm going to finish that. Now this is going to be indicative of our rainwater downpipe, so let's move that in place, and let's assume that that's going to be to the right hand side of our column. So let's put that in place there. Let's also repeat that for our other column. So I select that, I go to copy, and then I select the corner of the column here, and then the corner of the column there. And that's representing our rainwater downpipe. So let's modify the wall lining to encompass this void space and the rainwater downpipe. So I select the lining. The easiest way is to use the arrow key. So I'm going to use the right arrow key, and I'm going to tab this out. And you can see that the walls are joined, so everything is moving with it. But let's leave that around about there. Let's try it with the other one. So I select my wall lining, and I'm going to use the shift and the right arrow, and I'm going to tab that over. So now you see one of the differences. The wall with the integrated lining doesn't work very well for this scenario. It automatically includes that lining, and it's very difficult to adjust where it sits without having to create a separate wall just for this little segment. And that's why sometimes you may prefer the other method of having the wall lining as a separate wall. And that's the end of the video. Be sure to hit the notification bell to be notified for part 2 of the Revit Basic Walls video series. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.